Hi everyone, welcome to the Humanitarian Leadership Academy webinar, Turning Ideas into Action, Effective Proposal Writing for Humanitarians. I'm Parkinson, Communications and Marketing Advisor here at the HLA, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this month's Learning and Discussion Space, which will be the final one of the year, and I promise you it's going to be a great one. So we're focusing on crafting effective proposal writing, proposals with my two brilliant colleagues, Poppy Hankir and Jen Wilkins. So as you're joining us, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, letting us know where you're joining us from, your name and your organisation, if you like. So I'll now just introduce my colleagues. So Poppy is our Head of Business Development, and she holds 13 years of experience in business development, program management, and supporting humanitarian operations. She's led on donor management and awards compliance in Ukraine, Lebanon, Jordan, OPT, Somalia, and Sierra Leone. She has a successful track record in writing winning proposals for institutional donors, including USAID, the UK's FCDO, ECHO, UNICEF, as well as corporations, private trusts, and foundations. So welcome and thank you to Poppy. And welcome Jen Wilkins. Jen holds broad fundraising experience spanning grant writing, partnership development, campaigns and events, and has held professional, volunteer and board level roles in both the UK and the US, including at Diabetes UK and Cancer Research UK. So thank you once again, Poppy and Jen, for taking the time to be with us today and to share your expert insights with us. And welcome to everyone joining us. It's great to see people introducing themselves in the chat. So hello, Ishmael, Jalal, Ranjit. Hi, Ranjit from the EIE cohort in Asia. Hatis, Maria, Rufus, thank you so much for joining us. Today's session is 60 minutes, so it's quite short and sharp. It's a more condensed format than usual. So Poppy and Jen will give a shared presentation for the first half, and then we'll move into Q&A. So if you have any questions that you'd like us to put to Poppy and Jen in the second half, please use the Zoom Q&A function, and then we'll try and get through as many as we can. It'll be probably quite quick fire in the time that we have. And then you're very welcome to use the chat for any reflections or reactions that you may have as we go along. Just to remind you to keep any questions or comments that you have respectful and on topic, so relevant to fundraising and proposal writing. Thank you. For accessibility, you can turn on captions, including translated captions, by following those instructions on your screen. And this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording and the slide deck will be emailed to you in a post-event email. And you'll receive a separate email as well regarding an HPAS digital badge. So you'll be able to claim that in recognition of your engagement and learning in this forum today. So that's all from me for now. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Poppy, who will kickstart this presentation. Thank you, Poppy.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see people from so many different countries, so many different organizations. So I'm sure you're all on different time zones. So happy lunchtime if you're sitting there eating your lunch. Happy evening. Don't know if people have got children running around behind them trying to listen into this webinar, but please feel free to sit back and relax and just take it in, or to ask questions and engage any way you want. I did want to just start with a quick poll, just to understand kind of everyone's background and experience, and just to see if people are signed in and listening, but don't feel that you have to answer these questions. I don't know, Carman, if you're able to share the poll up with everyone, but if you feel comfortable with this, I wanted to ask, have you written a successful proposal for donor funding in the last year, so in the last 12 months? So who here on the call has written a proposal that successfully received funding? Maybe you wrote the whole thing, you're a business development specialist, maybe you're a programs person that contributed part of the proposal, but it would be good to know, yes, who's been successful in getting some funding in the last year. I can put my hand up and say, yes, I have thankfully written a successful proposal this year. The next question is, have you written more than 3 proposals in the last year that have been unsuccessful? So you put in a proposal to a donor, but you didn't get the funding. Again, I can put my hand up and say, yes, I have written more than 3 proposals, unfortunately, this year that didn't get the funding from the donor. So even as someone with quite a few years experience in proposal writing, even with our best efforts, they are not always successful, unfortunately. The next question is, have you ever submitted a proposal that did not receive feedback from the donor? So you just didn't hear anything. You put something in, you maybe didn't get any feedback, you didn't receive an email, you didn't get any kind of scoring of your proposal. And sorry, everyone, I actually started with question 2, so I should scroll back up on my screen to the first one. Have you actually ever written a proposal? Because I'm aware there might be some people joining this call who are totally new to the proposal writing field, and maybe you're just here for the first time to hear about what a proposal is and how you can get some hints and tips in proposal writing. So if people could answer those, and then I think Carman is going to show us the results. So 66% of you have written a proposal, 34% of you haven't written a proposal. That's absolutely fine. We're going to be doing some hints and tips in this session that I think apply to both of those groups. So those of you who are totally fresh, totally new, and those of you who have maybe already tried your hand at proposal writing. Have you written a successful proposal in the last 12 months? So our percentages are a bit reversed here. So good that 34% of you have managed to successfully write a proposal, but 66% of you haven't. And then in terms of the next question, 27% of us, so again, that includes myself, I've submitted several proposals for Save the Children and HLA this last year, and not all of them have received funding. So 27% of us have been unsuccessful with 3 or more proposals, but 73% of you answered no to that. So maybe you didn't make as many as 3 proposals, maybe you've been so successful in the ones that you have put in. And then we've got, have you ever submitted a proposal that did not receive feedback from the donor? So almost half-half split here. We've got 46% of people saying, yes, they did not get feedback, they didn't ever hear, and 54% saying no. So I'm assuming then that you did get some kind of feedback or evaluation, or you were notified from the donor. So thank you really everyone for participating in that. I'm going to be running the first part of the session, which is some hints and tips on how to respond to solicited proposals, or what we sometimes say are call for proposals. So what we mean here is this is when a particular donor has actually launched a call for proposals. So maybe they have an online portal, maybe this is through certain websites of the donor, maybe it's through the UN cluster coordination meetings in country, maybe they've actually invited you via email, but this is when the donor has a particular pot of money to distribute to a partner or partners for a particular region or a particular theme. So it might be, you know, asking for proposals in Somalia for food security projects, or it might be looking for organizations that develop civil society capacities in Ethiopia. So the theme and the countries can be quite specific, but this is where a donor has actually gone out and called organizations to give them proposals. And normally in these cases, they will give you the guidelines for what they want to receive. So there should be a donor template, a proposal template, a budget template. There should be some guidance on who is eligible to apply for funding. So really the first hint and tip I would give, and it might seem very obvious, would be to read that call for proposals. And sometimes with donors, they can be very detailed, like with the European Union, for example, and with ECHO, which is the humanitarian wing of the EU, they have very, very detailed guidance on what they're looking for in proposals. So I think the first step for any proposal writer or any kind of grants expert would be to really check what the donor is asking for, how many documents are meant to be submitted, how many pages the proposal should be. So the first thing I would do if I was checking out a new opportunity, or if a donor had invited me to apply for something, is, am I eligible? Is my organization eligible for this funding? Some donors, they only will give funding to registered NGOs in certain countries. So it might be that you have to have a registered office in the European Union, or you need to be registered in the UK, or you need to be registered in Ukraine if it's funding for Ukraine. Some will accept startups or social enterprises to apply. You don't necessarily need to have a registered charity or NGO number. You could be a startup organization. Or even some donors like USAID, BHA, they will accept applications from companies. So it might be that you're not a registered charity or a startup or a social enterprise, but you might be a company, or you might be an academic institution. So always check who is eligible to apply. Like, does your organization have the right registration and the right criteria? And then check what is called due diligence requirements. So lots of donors now, they ask you to pre-register with them as a partner and submit to them information about your organization in order to get funding from them. So an example of that would be USAID. So USAID, you need to register with them as an organization through their grant system, what's called grants.gov, and send them information about your past experience, send them information about your organization, so your registration certificate, send them information about your financial accounts from the last year, and basically give them information about who you are as an organization and your past experience before you can submit a proposal. So just check that you don't need to do that before you start writing your proposal. And if you do, how many days is it going to take for the donor to process all of that so you can be eligible to make an application? The next thing I would say is to just check the proposal guidelines. So does the donor give page and word limits? And if they do, then definitely respect them. Sometimes donors, if they say no more than 6 pages, they will stop reading the proposal at 6 pages. So if you submitted 9 pages, those last 3 pages are not going to get read. So really try and respect the page and the word limit. Even some donors, they tell you the font that should be used, the font type and the font size. And several donors ask you to submit supporting documents with your proposal. So they might ask, for example, for your project team CVs. So what are the CVs of the people who are going to deliver your proposed project? They might ask for your organizational account information or references from past donors. So really check all of those requirements before you start putting the information together. Then check the budget guidelines. So does the donor provide a budget ceiling? So by budget ceiling, we mean a maximum amount for the proposal. Is the maximum they have $5 million per proposal or per project, or 250,000? Like, what is the limit of funding? What is the currency that you should prepare the bid in? So for example, UK donors often use pounds. Lots of UN donors often work in dollars. Swiss donors might work in francs. Like, what currency do you need to present your budget in? And does the donor give you guidelines for the exchange rate, or can you use any exchange rate that you like? Then check if they have any limitations on direct versus indirect costs. So sometimes the donor will say we only accept projects that are 80% direct with 20% indirect costs. And what that means is 80% of the budget should be direct project costs, so things that you're going to distribute or staff that are directly implementing the project, with 20% being indirect costs, so overhead, office rent, logistics and support costs. And do they have a percentage limit on what we sometimes call ICR, indirect cost recovery, or admin? So several donors work with 7%. 7% being the maximum you can add on top of your project costs for your own administration. So you take that as flexible money to use how you want. Then I would say check the grading criteria. So if it's provided, not all donors will give this, but some donors will say in their call for proposals, this is how we are going to mark the proposal. We will give 20 points for the technical quality of the proposal. We will give 4 points for the price and whether we consider it to be VFM, value for money, like does this demonstrate a good value for money? We give a certain score for the quality of the project team CVs that you've submitted. So really see what's important for the donor and how they're going to score your proposal. And then the final one I would say would be check the submission guidelines. This might seem very simple, but we had a problem in our team recently where we were submitting to UNOP, and their time zone was actually different from the UK. So it was not a UK time zone, it was an American time zone, which can make a big difference when you're uploading and submitting documents. You don't want to miss a submission because the time zone is not your own one. And how do they want the proposal submitted? Is it via email? And sometimes when it's via email, the donor will actually say what you should put in the title of the email, who you should copy to that email, or is it a physical submission? So in some countries, especially with UN like organizations, they like you to actually print out, stamp and sign and hand in the proposal because they want to fund those who are based within that country. Or do they have an online portal like ECHO or like USAID where you submit online your documents? So just to check all of those before you start preparing and you work out how much time is needed to do that submission. So these are some basic hints and tips for solicited proposals. I will pass now to Jen to give some insights.
Thank you, Poppy, and hi everyone. My name is Jen Wilkins. I also work here in the Humanitarian Leadership Academy's fundraising team. Thank you to Poppy for sharing that overview and some hints around solicited proposals. I'm now going to talk through unsolicited proposals and gives 4 key areas that are worth always bearing in mind, and then also talk through a bit of a sample structure when working on an unsolicited proposal. So just start by saying, so unsolicited proposals are when we're engaging with a donor who hasn't explicitly invited us to apply for funding. So i.e. there's no call for proposals or expression of interest, unlike what Poppy has just spoken through in the case of solicited. Therefore, typically, we find that there isn't specific guidelines. There's not clear parameters or templates we need to follow. And it can feel quite vague and daunting for how we therefore put our information together and put it in front of the donor in a way that will hopefully result in them engaging and ultimately giving funding. But I will say that while it on the surface might feel a bit less secure than going for something where there's a specific call for proposals, sometimes unsolicited proposals can result in really exciting new opportunities and take you in a different direction than the traditional funding route where there is a call. So, for example, there might be more flexibility to scope and shape a relationship with that funder and to collaboratively come up with the mechanics that drive that funding relationship. So I'll start by going through the 4 elements on the left-hand side, 4 key things to consider when preparing an unsolicited proposal. So the first one is research. So really doing a deep job at understanding who the funder is. So what's their mission? What are their priority areas that they fund? What are they trying to achieve through their mission? And who have they funded in the past and for what kind of projects? This is really important to ensure that we're investing time producing unsolicited proposals in the right areas and building relationships with prospective funders that truly do align with the work that we're implementing. And also so that we can tailor and be specific in our proposals to these funders. The second one is, I'll jump down a step, so going to concise. So another really important one, when doing an unsolicited proposal, it's good to remember that the donor hasn't explicitly called or asked you to produce this. So clarity and concise language is really important. It's great to keep it short and write in a way that funders, if we imagine they don't know a single thing about what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, could somebody understand that proposal? So going back to, sometimes I like to even get somebody who truly does have a fresh pair of eyes to read over it and say, would you understand what I'm asking for, why it's important, and would you feel compelled to say, hey, yes, I'd like to learn more about this, and maybe even get on board and put an investment behind it. And then also within this category, I've suggested, like, broadly, it's a good idea to depending on, of course, on the proposal, but to roughly aim for 5 pages, to use clear and concise language and avoid using language that is specific to your organisation and is unlikely to be understood outside, especially without any explanation around that. The third one I'll jump to is evidence. So a really important one is ensuring we've got really strong basis for the project and also the credibility of the organisation and the work. So for example, using case studies, using testimonials and research to really back up why this project is important, why this funding is necessary and what will be achieved from it. And then finally, what are we actually asking of the donor? It'd be great to be specific about what we need from them. Are we asking purely for a funding relationship? Is it deeper than that? Is it a partnership? Is it open-ended? Are we asking for their input at the moment so that we can shape something? And then also at a more tactical level, at this moment in time, what are we asking them for? Would we like a follow-up conversation so that we can discuss this funding ask, or are we very much expecting a yes/no answer on whether they can invest? So we're far more likely to get engagement and responses if we're really clear and the donor understands what it is that's expected of them, and so that they can provide that. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see there's a bit of a sample structure for an unsolicited proposal. So as I mentioned at the beginning, because unsolicited doesn't come from a specific ask from a funder, it can feel quite daunting because there isn't really clear instructions and parameters for how we put together our response. So the things that listed out in this sample structure, they are just a sample and it does differ depending on from project to project. But broadly, it is a good idea to include, of course, a really understandable and clear title and dates for your project, to be specific about the geographic areas that implementation will happen. And then the next one is where the evidence really comes into play, to talk through what the problem statement is, what's the basis for this proposal, why have you come to the funder, and what evidence is there that this work is going to have an impact. To list out proposed activities, and then to, again, tie back into the evidence to be really clear about any prior experience you may have delivering similar projects is a really important one. And then the last few are around who is this going to benefit, or what is this going to benefit? And really spelling that out so that the funder can hopefully tie that back to their own impact objectives and their own mission. And then depending on where the project is in terms of, sometimes we're applying for funding and there's we're already far enough along that we've got a clear project plan, or maybe we've done a pilot. There could be something that could be included around a very high level project plan, and then a top line budget around specifically what is required of the funder from a funding perspective and what will be achieved with that. Overall, I'd say it's key throughout an unsolicited proposal, as much as it is for solicited, but arguably more important for unsolicited, to really demonstrate alignment with the funder vision, so that when they're reading or looking or having conversations about this proposal, they can really see and understand the compelling case for why they are the ones that should be investing in this project and why it aligns with their work. And even without a formal solicitation for a proposal, if a proposal is put in unsolicited with a clearly articulated, compelling argument, it can really stand out and lead to new opportunities. So now we've heard a bit about solicited proposals and I've talked through some unsolicited tips. I'm going to hand it back over to Poppy to talk through some general hints and tips for proposals.
Thanks, Jen. I see some people have put some questions in the chat box, but I think what would be really helpful is we've only got a couple more slides to go, and then if you could put the questions in the Q&A forum, then Jen and I can pick them up there and kind of provide, if we can, answers to your questions. For this slide, I'm really doing what I consider to be generic hints and tips for proposals. So this really applies to solicited and unsolicited. Like, it doesn't really matter if the donor has actually specifically requested, or you're just putting something together to pitch to a donor. I think these hints and tips are they're the same for both. Like they're good practices in proposal writing. So I learned this in a training many years ago, and somehow it stayed with me. But I always say, when you're thinking of a project title, think KISS. So KISS is keep it short and simple. So when you're thinking what to call your project, don't describe every single activity you're going to do in the title. So for me, an example of a not very good project title might be distribution of NFI and wash kits to 16,000 people in the Beirut district of Lebanon. Like this, okay, we understand what it is. We understand that is what the project is going to achieve, but that's more a description or summary of activities. I think a better proposal title is to keep it a bit broader. So that same project I just mentioned, maybe you want to call it something like supporting access to wash and NFIs in Beirut, Lebanon, 2024. You know, so really try and keep it short and simple, or increasing communities' capacities to access trainings in X region, rather than listing out every single training or capacity strengthening initiative that you might be running. Another thing I've seen partners do in some proposals is to go back very far in their experience. So, you know, some organizations have been existing for many years in a country, and actually Save the Children has been operating for 100 years. You know, we have 100 years of experience in different crises in different countries. But a donor doesn't really want to know what you were doing in 1990s or in 2010 or 2020. Like, if they're giving funding in this year, they really want to see your recent relevant experience. And I would say that's like anything up to 3 years. So don't go back and list out your project from 8, 9, 10 years ago, or start talking about the foundation of your organization. They want something more up to date. And by experience, they're looking for geography. So, you know, if you're applying for funding to deliver something in, let me take the Lebanon example again, but in Beirut, have you done anything in Beirut before? Have you worked with partners in Beirut? Have you delivered activities? And if not in Beirut, where near to Beirut? In Lebanon, or is this your first time in that country? You know, where's your recent geographic experience? And then they want to see sector experience. So if you're proposing to do an education in emergencies project in Kenya, have you got experience of doing education in emergency type activities in any other country or within Kenya itself? Like, what projects have been funded in the past where you have delivered something in that education sector? Same with partners. If you're trying to do a consortium project, which is often like a group of partners coming together to make a proposal, or if you're working through local partners, or you're working in collaboration with any government ministries or academic partners or training providers, like, what's your experience of working with those partners? Are they new to you, or have you worked with them for several years on other projects? And then what experience do you have with that donor? You know, if you're applying for funding from UNICEF, did you already run 1 or 2 projects with UNICEF in the recent past? If so, definitely mention that in your proposal, that you have experience of that donor, you know how they work, you know their reporting requirements, you successfully delivered a project with their funding before. Or if not with that donor, a similar donor. Let's say you want to get funding from UNICEF, but you didn't have any funding from UNICEF before. Maybe you had funding from UNHCR. So you can say that you worked with another UN donor in the past. One thing that I think is very important for all of the major donors, including actually some corporates, some companies, some trusts and foundations, is what we call gender disaggregation. So this doesn't mean that your project needs to focus on women or girls, or be a feminist project, or focus on a particular gender, but it's more how you describe the impact of your project on different genders in your proposal. So, for example, if you have done a needs assessment, or if you're sharing any other organization's needs assessment to prove your project, explain the different assessments that were done on men and women. So how many men responded to the survey, for example, how many women responded, how many women were interviewed in key informant interviews, how many men were interviewed. And also in your project's proposed output. So if you say that you want to distribute NFIs to 1,000 individuals, how many do you expect to be male and female? And give a percentage or give a number. And also in your reporting. So when you tell the donor you're going to report back to them, you can tell the donor, you know, all of our reporting, all of our data will be disaggregated by gender. We will share with you, you know, how many women were reached, how many men were reached. So it's just putting this throughout the proposal meets that kind of gender marker, they call it, the gender marker requirements of different donors. When you're proposing outputs and measurements for your project, so when you're actually saying what you're going to do, what you're going to achieve, what the impact of your project is going to be, and how you're going to measure or monitor that, we always say to make them smart. So this is a little test of if people are following me and listening to me, no pressure. But can anyone put in the chat box what they think the acronym SMART means? Has anyone heard of it before? Did anyone ever put it in their proposals? Feel free to guess anything. I don't know if anyone wants to type an idea. Is anyone feeling brave? I'm looking at the chat. Oh, yes, someone has spoken up here. 2 people are speaking up. Yes, very well done. You're all correct, if I can check your answers. So it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And what that means is, like, let's say you are going to provide education kits for children. So you could say we are going to distribute education kits to children in this region. That's not a smart output. A smart output would be we will distribute 1,000 individual school kits to 1,000 individual children by March 2025. So it's time bound. You're saying by when you're going to do it. That's what time bound means. You're going to give those kits to those children by March 25. It's measurable. You've said that it is 1,000 kits to 1,000 children. So each child is getting 1 kit. And you should also say, based on my point above, 60% girls, 40% boys, or 50% girls, 50% boys. So you've also given that gender. And it's specific. You're not just saying we're going to give out some school kits to people. You're saying it's like specifically to children of this age range, you know, 8 to 12-year-olds by this date. And it's achievable, like with the budget that you will give them, like you can show that you can purchase and distribute these 1,000 kits. You're not saying something crazy like 2 million kits will be distributed by tomorrow. You know, that's what achievable means. So yeah, to put that in an output, I would say that we will distribute 1,000 school kits to 1,000 school-age children of the ages of 8 to 12 by March 2025. And that is a very smart output. And you can do that with other things like other distribution like NFIs or water kits or emergency shelter kits, or even for the less urgent humanitarian assistance. Let's say you're training some community members in hygiene practices. You can say that 500 individuals representing 125 households, 60% women, 40% men, will attend a 2-hour hygiene session by June 2025. This again is like a more specific, smart way of describing your output. Donors, I would say, nearly always prefer your own or your implementing partner's needs assessment. So that's why I've said your own or your partner's needs assessment is best, because they want to see how you've gone out in the community, how you've visited households, or you've brought people together to assess their needs. Maybe it's through key informant interviews, maybe it's through evaluating a recently finished past project and community members told you they have continued needs. Maybe it's through surveying. Maybe it's through partners in the cluster system who have sent forward their needs assessment, but I would say that would be the best needs assessment, even if it's only on a small group of people, to give to the donor. If you have to use a second-hand needs assessment, second-hand being like a UN situation report or another agency's research or something you found online, then make sure it's recent. You know, don't be putting assessment data from 5 or 6 years ago. Like, make it as recent as possible and cite it. So give in brackets like which organization produced this information, the date of the assessment, you know, give them credit for that assessment. So these would be my generic hints and tips. And I think also following a very good point of Jen in her previous slide, when she said, investigate what your donor is interested in. Definitely use the donor's own language back at them in the proposal. So let's say a donor says on their website, or they say in the call for proposals, we're looking to fund innovative projects that help communities become more sustainable. Say in your proposal, we're presenting this innovative project that help develop community sustainability. You know, repeat the words back to them so they can see in your proposal that you are linked with them, like you share the same goal, you share the same output. So definitely steal some of their phrases. Definitely do not use ChatGPT. I should have put this as big big capital letters in this slide. Lots of donors read proposals now for ChatGPT. They try and see, like, have you basically run your idea through AI and produced it, and you'll be removed from the process. I guess you won't get the funding. So it's okay if, like, English isn't your first language, you're looking to make it sound more professional. Maybe you can run some sections through ChatGPT, but always put the human touch in there, because donors will realize that ChatGPT has written it. At least a lot of the donors, they will check for that. So I see a lot of laughing emojis. I'm sure we have all done it. I made my own CV by ChatGPT, so it's not like I never use the thing, but just not when you're doing the full proposal, I guess. All right, sorry, the time is going on and I'm talking a lot as always, so I'm going to move on to Jen for the last slide before we have the Q&A.
Thank you, Poppy. Some great general hints and tips there. We're just going to finish before the Q&A talking through some insights into when you're planning out a proposal process, when you know that you're going to be writing a proposal, some general things that can be helpful to do to ensure that you set yourself up for success. So whether you're working on a solicited or an unsolicited proposal, it's always worth planning out end to end what the next few weeks or months or days look like, so that you can plan your time and ensure that you tick everything off and you're not scrambling at the last minute, which unfortunately is extremely common in the proposal writing world. So for me, one way that I like to do this is to start with the date that I need to submit the proposal by. So for solicited proposals, this might be a really hard deadline with a very specific time that I need to submit something into a portal or send something to an email address. For unsolicited, this might be a date that I've agreed with a funder that I'm going to be sending something across to them, or that I've set up a call and I want to follow up the call with a proposal, or it might just be an internal date that I've agreed with my internal team and colleagues that we are going to have something ready by so that I can present it to a prospective funder. So I start with, okay, on the far right of the screen, I've got a date in the future that I need or want to submit my proposal by. Excuse me. And from there, I like to work backwards too. So I know that date in the future and I know today's date and I know there's a whole list of activities I need to get done in the meantime. So that helps inform my time and how much time I have for each of those in the middle activities. So for example, the week we probably don't want to be pressed right against the final day of the deadline is the day we're trying to get a submission through. Sometimes unforeseen things come up, priorities shift, and the last thing we want is to be at the last minute scrambling, trying to get something submitted. So we probably want to then take a step backwards and say, okay, we know our deadline. Let's plan that we're ready to submit slightly ahead of that, and then we have a bit of buffer if needed. And maybe the week prior to the deadline, we want to be focusing purely on less about writing content and more around the review and the sign off of the proposal. So for that stage, I'd be thinking about things like, who do I need to engage in reviewing this document? Who would be good? Who do I need to have input from, and who would be good to have input from? Can I give them a heads up now and let them know that this is coming, and maybe preempt if somebody actually isn't going to be available that week, that perhaps I need to try and have something ready for them a bit before, or agree with them that they're going to have eyes on the proposal at the last moment before it gets submitted. Also thinking about who might need to review the finances and the budget. And then, as I said, communicating all of these timeframes so that all stakeholders are on that same page. And then lastly, allowing time to absorb any feedback. So the review isn't just a tick box exercise so that enough people have seen it. It's genuinely so that we can get insights from a range of different viewpoints and individuals and experts in different areas, and then go away and actually improve and put together an even higher quality proposal as a result. So we'd want to be ensuring that the review and sign-off process sits sufficiently before the proposal submission to allow enough time to absorb any feedback that comes back. And then prior to that, taking one step backwards, we'd be actually drafting the bulk of the content. So for this step, I'd need to be thinking about, okay, who are my subject matter experts? Who's working on who will be working on the implementation should we win this funding? Do I need to engage different team members, other external partners who we might be collaborating with on this proposal, and thinking through all the people I would want to be bringing together to collaborate on populating the content. Maybe I'd also be thinking, do I have questions for the funder that I would need to be asking at this earlier stage, so that, again, there's sufficient time to receive answers and tweak the proposal accordingly. Thinking through what's the best, like any tools and processes. So what's the best format for actually putting this proposal into? Maybe it's a solicited proposal and there's really strict parameters, and I need to be factoring that in at the draft content stage, and ensuring that any people who are helping and supporting with the content population, we're adhering to that and we're making it easy for ourselves, so that down the line there's not extensive effort to translate it into the adequate tools so we can submit our proposal. And then finally, and really importantly, ensuring that anyone who's involved at this stage is really clear on their role, the timeframes we're working towards, and that there's a really clear sense of ownership around who's doing what. And then the last thing, which is actually the first thing that you come to, so because I said we've worked backwards, is our go, no-go decision. And this is a really important one. And this is around making that critical decision and the first important step in proposal writing, to decide whether we should even pursue an opportunity and move forward with producing a proposal in the first place. So of course, putting together any kind of proposal or conversations with donors requires effort. Time spent putting together a proposal, convening people, gathering evidence, etc. And we want to be ensuring that this level of effort is directed at opportunities that truly do align with our project, with our organisation and our mission, and also opportunities that we truly do have capacity to deliver on, and that we genuinely meet the funding criteria for, and we feel it's worth our investment. The last thing we want is to get so far in the process and then decide that we maybe, or find out that we weren't eligible for that funding, so we have to abandon, or that actually we hadn't quite finished the due diligence and we wouldn't be willing to accept funding from that donor should we win it in the first place. So this is a really critical one where we would be looking to convene all the stakeholders in the proposal and the sort of the resources in the project implementation phase, to brief everybody and bring everybody onto that same page around what the opportunity is, so that we can make a decision on whether it aligns strategically, whether we have capacity to deliver both the proposal, whether we've got enough runway between that proposal submission date and this go-no decision to produce something that's quality, and whether we have the capacity to deliver should we win the work. And then also to just query that donor and ensure query the donor, the funder, and ensure that we have all the ducks in a row that we could proceed with that funding should we secure it. So that's sort of a whistle-top tour of the key elements that would be present in any proposal writing process. And one way, just the way that I choose to do it, to approach ensuring that the process can go as smoothly as it possibly can, by ensuring you do have that adequate time baked in for each stage. Sorry, just making sure I've covered everything but also conscious of time, and we've got lots of great questions coming in. Yeah, I will just finish to say that that first step, the go, no go, is probably the most important one, because we want to, when we start off any proposal process, we want to ensure that everybody is on that same page and equally invested in the opportunity, because that's, of course, fundamental for setting us up for success. I will leave it there so that we can pivot over to questions. I will hand it back to Kaman, and yeah, looking forward to hearing everybody's reflections and questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Poppy and Jen. That was amazing. So many great tips and insights there. Like I said on the chat earlier, we'll send a copy of the slides and the recording to everyone. So don't worry if you feel like you've missed something out there. So we've got 15 minutes for the Q&A. So it's going to be quite a quick fire round, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. And what I'll do is take the liberty of sort of thematically grouping a few together. So there's a few questions coming through, like from Sarang Jallo, asking for like guidance on a template or a sample. Do you have any ideas or suggestions for how they could go about finding that type of information? That could be for either of you, Poppy or Jen.
Hi, yeah, I tried to answer a few questions directly in the chat when Jen, you were giving that last slide, because I saw quite a few questions had come through. I think in terms of a template, it would be best to look back at the slide that Jen delivered about unsolicited proposals, because that gives you a kind of example of headings that you can use, like project title, project statement, needs assessment, activities, etc. In terms of sharing a successful proposal with you, to be honest, like, at least I can speak from the experience of Save the Children, HLA, and a few previous organizations I've worked for. We normally wouldn't share our successful proposals externally, because they're quite specific to our organization. They explain our organization's past relationships and our partners, and also the budget contains like the salaries of our staff and the costs that we have in different countries. And so to give it to another organization and then kind of copy or take parts of it, it can be a little bit we don't necessarily want proposals floating out there that kind of copy or take parts of our proposals. So I wouldn't be able, and also all proposals are different. You know, a proposal on food distribution is going to be very different from a long-term capacity strengthening project. So you can always Google, you know, like winning humanitarian proposals or successful funding proposals. I think the EU sometimes publishes some, so you might get some examples there, but we normally would share like a template, but not necessarily a filled out proposal that would have all of our budget information.
Brilliant. Thank you, Poppy. The next couple of questions are around the use of AI and ChatGPT. So I know, Poppy, you basically gave a very clear, do not use it like a blanket across the board. But Sophie and Ranjit have both asked questions around whether there may be occasions or aspects of it that it would be okay and appropriate to use ChatGPT, for example, secondary research. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm happy to take a first stab at this with my view, and then Poppy, if you want to add anything, go for it. I think with everything, seems like a cop-out answer, but there's always pros and cons. There's obviously a lot more use cases for using AI, and proposal writing, I'm sure, has popped up, seems like for a lot of you, lots of questions coming in about it. I think I would always advise to use caution, as Poppy said. I think there's definite cases where if language has been drafted using AI, it has the potential that it will get screened out and potentially then disqualify that proposal. So I think for me, I would if you choose to use it, I would probably say more at the idea stage. So to help to maybe get ideas for how to structure it, or sort of how to get a skeleton of to talk about, I don't know, a project work plan, but then applying your own data and your own projects over the top of it. So I think while it can be useful to get tips on I don't know, a sample structure of a proposal in a specific area, and then applying that structure, the bits that stand out to you and resonate with your project, but the actual content has come from within your specific project. I think that can be tremendously helpful to spark ideas and give examples. But I personally, I wouldn't do things like pasting my own answers in and asking for support embellishing that. I never quite know what the rules are around sort of like data privacy and things. So I don't know that would be a very good idea. I think I would personally stick to it for just support with general ideas for how to lay something out, or how to give a sample answer that I can then use as a basis to say, okay, well, how do I apply this to my own work? To come up with something that's a bit different and interesting. And I think the second word of caution is that sometimes using AI for any setting, it can then end up diverging from what you were originally intending to say. So I think that's always worth being aware of, that sometimes you could end up then offering things in your proposal that actually were never part of the offering, but have been potentially added in through AI and missed as part of the review process. So worth bearing that in mind as well.
Great, thank you, Jen. That sounds like really sound advice there. I've got a question from Belma, who asks, what advice would you give to a new organisation with limited project experience and less developed due diligence processes, for example, lack of documents, to improve their proposals and credibility when applying for funding? Could I put that one to you, perhaps, Poppy?
Yeah, this is a great question. Honestly, I would say that it might be tricky for you to directly get funding from a major donor, because, you know, a lot of the large donors, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, because we all love due diligence, are going to want to see that kind of evidence of past experience, of robust financial accounts, of yeah, they're going to want some legal information. But I think the easier route for you would be to partner with an international INGO. So rather than trying to approach a donor directly, like going to UN or going to USAID, would be to go to international organizations working in your country, in your region, like Save the Children, ActionAid, War Child, you know, some of the bigger organizations, and seeing if you could be what's called a sub-partner or an implementing partner with existing funding from that organization, because their requirements will be lower in a way than the donors, and you may be able to start building some project experience by partnering with the international organizations. You can also look at specific donors, like USAID does have a civil society grant function, which is like smaller scale funding and for smaller size organizations that don't require all of the due diligence. So a few people asked this question in the chat, like, where can I look for funding? Where can I find funding? I'm happy to send some example websites and some platforms where you can filter and search for funding opportunities. I can send it to Carman to circulate with this recording and this webinar. But if several of you on the call are representing smaller organizations, I can send a couple web links where donors give smaller grants for smaller organizations that you might be able to access without needing that full kind of due diligence of the big donors, if that is helpful. I hope that answers that question.
Great, thank you, Poppy. I think we're in the last sort of closing few minutes before we have to wrap up. So I'll try and squeeze in 2 quick questions. So Damaris on the chat has asked, if you would like to show experience through case studies, CVs, etc., could you speak a little about this and how you screen the best candidates for the potential project?
Happy to jump in here. Hopefully I'm approaching this from the right angle. So if the question's around sort of like tactically how to showcase, I think it's worth just thinking about the type of proposal you're submitting and what makes sense within the parameters of that. But in the past, this could look like including like within the body of the proposal itself, dispersing case studies, and then potentially having like a project team section which refers out to like an annex which contains the CVs. So those are probably the 2 main ways, so including things within the body or having a separate reference section where you save. And a really good tip is to be quite like diligent around your naming process, so it's really clear and easy for that donor to say, okay, for the CVs I'm referring to Annex A, B and C, and I can quite clearly see that that's project team member, delivery project manager and technical expert. In terms of screening best potential candidates for the project, I think this is probably more like internal conversations around who holds the expertise to be able to deliver that implementation successfully, and then based on the needs of the project, working with that individual or asking that individual to ensure that their CV is reflective so that it emphasizes in the right places so that it does meet those needs. I think if they're truly the best person for the job, then that's the person you should use, rather than saying this person's CV looks better and therefore we'll use that one. But of course, I think definitely check things where there are requirements from donors. So I've seen in the past requests that somebody must hold a master's degree, but perhaps the person who will be implementing that doesn't. So then thinking about, do we have another project team where we can make sure we are supplying a CV that does tick that box and meet that requirement, so that we're not potentially losing out despite having a very qualified and the right person for the role. Hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on that one. Poppy, if you want to add anything, please feel free. If not, take another question.
Great. I'm going to squeeze in 1 more question and then we'll wrap up. So apologies if we haven't got round to yours. But I'm going to take the liberty of grouping a couple together. So I think if I'm interpreting these correctly, Shakiru is asking how they count experience from self-funded projects within proposals, and someone else has asked a similar kind of thing, Letlage, sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, about how to cite personal project engagement. So it's about how to sort of incorporate that into the proposal, if I've interpreted that correctly. What do you think, Poppy?
That's a good question, and I think that's fine, to be honest. I mean, if you've done something in your community, if you've done something in an affected region, if you basically help people and then you're applying to a donor for money to do a similar thing or extend those activities or increase what you're doing in your community, I think it's fine however that project was funded. You know, maybe it came from community donations, maybe a wealthy individual or group of community members funded that initiative. I think that's okay, and it's still relevant experience. I mean, a lot of donors will prefer to see other donors that have funded you, but you have to start somewhere, right? Like someone needs to be the first donor to fund your work. So I think it's okay if you give good examples of how you have delivered assistance or done charity projects with your own funding, with community funding, with funding from loans or banks, or however that money has come to you. If you've used it for good intentions and charity projects in the community, I think you should definitely highlight that in the donor application. I don't think that will be seen negatively at all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Poppy. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'm sure we could run another one of these webinars because of all the pearls of wisdom and insights you've given are so valuable, and I'm sure that the audience members have really taken away a lot from what you've advised. So thank you so much, Poppy and Jen. So I'm just going to take 1 minute to outline next steps. So when this session comes to a close and your browser window closes, you'll get a quick survey pop up on your screen. So if you could take a minute to fill that in, that would be brilliant. This webinar has been recorded, and we'll send a copy of this to you within the next 24 hours. So please keep an eye on your inbox, and the slide deck will also be shared with you as a PDF. And then keep your eye out for a separate email regarding your HPass digital badge. So you'll get details of how you can claim that. There's a preview of what that badge looks like on the screen, and you can share that on LinkedIn and let everyone know that you've been in this learning and discussion space with us today. So that's it now. So thank you once again to Poppy and Jen for such a brilliant and insightful session. And thank you to our brilliant audience who've asked questions and engaged with us in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm now drawing this session to a close. Thank you.